Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Lati Akiri. The headlines. With the war in Ukraine inching closer to its 6th month, UN Chief Antonio Guterres uses it as an example of conflicts which put the world one step away from nuclear disaster. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken accuses Russia of using Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to launch attacks. And Moscow denies Washington's accusations of using that power plant as a military base. We begin the program this morning with the United Nations chief's warning that humanity is just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation away from a nuclear annihilation, citing the war in Ukraine, nuclear threats in Asia and the Middle East, and many other factors. Mr. Antonio Guterres was speaking at the opening of the 10th Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty on the Non-proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which runs through 26th of August in New York. The danger of increasing nuclear threats and a nuclear catastrophe was also raised by the United States, Japan, Germany, the UN nuclear chief, and many other opening speakers at the meeting to review progress and agree to future steps to implement the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, known as the NPT.
That started following the end of the Cold War are gathering once more. We have been extraordinarily lucky so far, but luck is not a strategy, nor is it a shield from geopolitical tensions boiling over into nuclear conflict. Today, humanity is just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation. We need the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as much as ever. We urgently need to reinforce and reaffirm the 77-year-old norm against the use of nuclear weapons. This requires a steadfast commitment from all states parties. It means finding practical measures that will reduce the risk of nuclear war and put us back on the path to disarmament. We need to strengthen all avenues of dialogue and transparency. And peace cannot take hold in an absence of trust and mutual respect. Eliminating nuclear weapons is the only guarantee they will never be used. We must work relentlessly towards this goal. And this must start with new commitments to shrink the numbers of all kinds of nuclear weapons so that they no longer hang by a thread over humanity. And it means reinvigorating and fully resourcing our multilateral agreements and frameworks around disarmament and non-proliferation, including the important work of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mykolaiv, says the future of the NPT was unpredictable after Russia had breached every existing norm of international law by starting its war in Ukraine. The Swedish Foreign Minister, Ann Christian Lind, said that the continued expansion and modernization of nuclear weapons by Russia gives cause for great concern. The treaty on the NPT came into effect in 1970 and aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, to foster the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and to further the goal of disarmament. And the United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who also spoke at the UN about what he called a critical moment in efforts to keep the world safe from nuclear threats. Mr. Blinken was also critical of what he said was Russia's use of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine to launch attacks, knowing that Ukrainian forces would not strike back.
We respect one way or the other. We're deeply concerned about the fact that Russia has taken over nuclear facilities in Ukraine, particularly in Zaporizhzhia, one of the largest nuclear facilities in Europe. There are credible reports, including in the media today, that Russia is using this plant as the equivalent of a human shield, but a nuclear shield, in the sense that it's firing on Ukrainians from around the plant. And of course, the Ukrainians cannot and will not fire back lest there be a terrible accident involving a nuclear plant.
And reacting to the claims by the U.S. Secretary of State, Moscow's mission to the United Nations has categorically rejected that Russian forces were using Ukraine's nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia as, quote, a military base. currently under the control of Russian forces. Zaporizhzhia has been a target of several attempted strikes in recent months. The Russian mission to the UN explained that after Russia sent troops into Ukraine, the power plant and its surroundings were taken under guard for the exact purpose of preventing such nuclear...
those war criminals that are being held are for very serious murder charges. And so this is going to be, I think, a greater challenge for the U.S. than was expected. They were thinking this was really going to focus in on what the U.S. political system could do to be able to assist in this. But it looks like the U.S. is going to have influence globally to be able to bring Brittany Griner home.
Just overnight, the Biden administration, as you referenced in your report, scored what many would describe, especially many outside the United States, as a big win going into November's midterm elections by a targeted strike in killing off Al-Qaeda leader, the new leader. The U.S. killed the previous leader, that was Osama bin Laden, and the man who took over from him, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was killed overnight. How has that been received in the political spectrum? Is it given the Biden administration any kind of bump, do you think?
Well, we have seen President Biden has had his second bout with COVID, and he spoke on this right there from right outside of his quarters where he's in isolation, the first time ever that we've had a president speak from that location in the White House. And so that's how important this announcement was, and the killing of the Al-Qaeda leader, which, you know, Al-Qaeda has been obviously since 9/11 one of the greatest threats, one of the greatest adversaries, and I think for the American people, one that if you hear the word Al-Qaeda, and especially when you talk about taking down a leader, that whether or not you sit on the Republican or Democratic side of the House, they see that as a win. This has not happened since the Obama administration, as you mentioned, with Osama bin Laden, and so we will likely see that his approval ratings will definitely increase. I think that he was struggling there for a moment. The real question, though, is this enough to impact the Democratic Party as a whole? As you mentioned, in this upcoming November election, is he going to be able to have this impede upon not only his approval ratings, but those of the Democratic Party?
The other thing, of course, is that, and that's now talking about U.S. politics itself, that some of the legislation that has been stuck in Congress, amazingly as a result of opposition from within the Democratic Party, now seems to be inching forward. There's a deal between Chuck Schumer, that's the Democratic Senate leader, and Senator Manchin, who had held up this legislation for quite a while. That caught quite a number of people by surprise. And now the expectation is that some of this legislation, which had been held up by the Senate, the House had done its part, may now move forward. Could that possibly impact President Biden's administration positively if it happens ahead of November?
It could impact it, you know, in a positive way. We know that Senator Manchin has been one of the Democrats that has definitely been more in the middle. He has more of a conservative ideology in some way, which is why he's attracted oftentimes to both the Republican and Democratic side of the House. Based off of where he's located in West Virginia, that is the landscape of the individuals that he supports and he represents. And so that is definitely going to help Senate. I think that it will have somewhat of an impact on President Biden's approval, but really what it's going to do is it's going to allow Democrats and those who are looking to see or supporters of Manchin and those who are supporters of Chuck Schumer to put some more faith in the senators and specifically in the Democratic Party as it relates to them coming to vote in November.
Finally, before I let you go, I must ask now, on the other side, that's talking about the Republicans ahead of November, former President Donald Trump has been making a big splash, and it's all but certain now, it would appear, that he is going to try to make a run in the next election. But ahead of that, there are these midterm elections to show his strength, both within the Republican Party and within the American political space. As with everything else about Donald Trump, this is controversial. What are you hearing about how this is playing out in the public space?
Well, you still have those who are heavily supporting former President Trump. We just had a poll that was done related to Liz Cheney's approval rating in Wyoming. And you have many Republicans that feel as though she should be supporting the president, and she is one of the very outspoken Republicans as it relates to the January 6th attacks and those hearings that have been taking place. And so we know there are many Republicans, especially those who are supporting the MAGA movement, that are going to support and would support if he was able to make it through the Republican primaries. So the real question at this time is whether or not the January 6th committee is going to be able to get things done in a manner and a time frame that would allow for him to either be, from a public perspective, taken out of the runnings from the public approval standpoint, or whether or not there'll be criminal charges brought forth that could then put him in a position of not being able to run. But as it relates to the midterm elections, you can guarantee that you will continue to see the January 6th hearings making it all the way up until that time frame to ensure that those who support former President Trump and are in alignment with his ideologies, and that it might have even been involved in the January 6th attacks in some way, are not able to, or giving them a very tough run for their election come November.
Thank you, Maria, for the time and for the perspective this morning. We'll keep a close eye on many of those issues, especially as they relate to the ongoing international crisis involving Russia and Ukraine.
Thank you.
And after the break, London reallows insurance provisions for aircraft, sea vessels, and components linked to Russian entities. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has welcomed the restart of food exports from his country's Black Sea port of Odessa. In an evening video address, Mr. Zelensky described the shipment as the first positive signal that there is a chance to stop the development of a world food crisis. He, however, warned that Russia may still attempt to disrupt food exports from Ukraine, adding that Ukraine was ready to dispatch more food around the world.
На Чорному морі. Перше судно, яке перевозить 26.
The implementation of the initiative regarding the export of Ukrainian grain and other agricultural products from our Black Sea port has started. The first ship, which is carrying 26,000 tons of corn, left the port of Odessa. As of now, it is too early to make any conclusions and predict future events. But the port has commenced working. Export movement has started. And this can be called the first positive sign that there's a chance to stop the development of food crisis in the world. Now, everything depends on the implementation of security parameters of the initiative. And it is the responsibility of partners, first of all, the United Nations and Turkey. We should not have any illusions that Russia will simply refrain from disrupting Ukrainian exports. Russia has consistently provoked hunger in African and Asian countries, traditionally importing significant amounts of Ukrainian food. And now, in the conditions of extreme heat, as in Europe this year, there is also the threat of price crisis and certain food deficit for some European countries. We will see how the agreement will work and whether there will be security. 16 vessels are already waiting their turn for departure, and we are ready to make a proper contribution to stabilizing the world food market. For our state, this also brings significant benefit, and it is not only about billions of dollars in foreign exchange revenue. About 500,000 Ukrainians are involved in the cultivation of agricultural export crops. And if we add related industries, then this is plus 1 million jobs. That is why there is appropriate state attention to implementing the export initiative. Our people really need it.
And just like the Ukrainian president, the United Nations chief is praising the first shipment of Ukrainian grain out of the Odessa port since Russia invaded Ukraine 5 months ago as an enormous collective achievement. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres was speaking about a safe passage deal that's been described as a glimmer of hope in a worsening global food crisis. The sailing was made possible after Turkey and the United Nations brokered a grain and fertilizer export agreement between Russia and Ukraine last month, a rare diplomatic breakthrough in a conflict that has become a drawn-out war of attrition. Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February the 24th has led to a worldwide food and energy crisis, and the United Nations is warned of the risk of multiple famine this year. UN Chief Antonio Guterres said he hoped the departure will be the first of many such cargoes, and that UN would charter a ship to replenish supplies of aid.
26,000 tons of corn became the first commercial ship to sail from the port of Odessa since the 25th of February. It should arrive at the inspection location in Turkish territorial waters tomorrow, 2 August. Following the inspection, it will proceed to its final destination in Tripoli, Lebanon. This ship, the merchant vessel Razone, is loaded with 2 commodities in short supply: corn and hope. Hope for millions of people around the world who depend on the smooth running of Ukraine's ports to feed their families. The ship's departure is the first concrete result of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. It has been a long journey since I presented the proposal to the leaders of the Russian Federation and Ukraine at the end of April. Today's departure is an enormous collective achievement by the Joint Coordination Center set up last week in Istanbul under United Nations auspices. What we have witnessed today in Odessa is an important starting point. It must be the first of many commercial ships bringing relief and stability to global food markets. The Black Sea Grain Initiative allows for significant volumes of exports from 3 Ukrainian ports: Odessa, Chornomorsk, and Yuzhny. Together with the agreed facilitation of the unimpeded access of Russian food products and fertilizers to world markets, it will bring relief and stability to global food markets and help tackle the global food crisis. Ensuring that grain, fertilizers, and other food-related items are available at reasonable prices to developing countries is a humanitarian imperative. People on the verge of famine need these agreements to work in order to survive. Countries on the verge of bankruptcy need these agreements to work in order to keep their economies alive.
Let's talk to Dr. Olena Snigra, expert at the Center for Global Studies Strategy. She joins us virtually from Kiev in Ukraine. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
Let's start off from where the UN Secretary General stopped, and the President of Ukraine as well, which is that what has happened over the last 24 hours or thereabouts with regards to grain has been positive. But that there's cause for cautious optimism that this will go well, but that there are still quite a number of bolts to tie down. Is that your reading of it as well?
Well, we see now in with this grain agreement is that Russia is obviously interested in committing to this grain agreement. So Russia is interested because it needs the same, to appear as a party that is negotiable. Because during last half of a year, since the start of the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, Russia became isolated in the world. So sticking to this agreement, Russia shows yeah, you can talk to us and maybe we will agree to something and we will let some grain from Ukraine to be sent to the countries that need it. So this is the main point. So if we see the ship, the first ship with the grain, that will come successfully.
Actually, that ship should be on the screen at this point. That's the ship we should be looking at now, the Razone. Well, that's it on your screen there.
Yeah, so that means that Russia is itself needs very much this agreement to be on the table, that it needs to be to be a partner in negotiations. So here is the Russian interest, first of all. For Ukraine, it's also there is a very deep interest, because we need currency, our economy need money, and we also have agreements with other countries, with third countries who buy our grain. So we need to commit our agreements. So this grain has to be sold to the countries which buy it. But the problem, I would say that while listening to all these comments today, I don't hear any comments about future year. What will happen in 2023 and in 2024? Because Ukraine is the 7th grain supplier in the world, and the 6th supplier of their corn and the sunflower grain seeds. So it's we are not sure that there will be peace in Ukraine next year, and that war stops. And today we already see that the amount of our fields that the Ukrainian harvest today is twice less than the last year, so the previous year. So in the next year it can be even worse, and Ukraine will not be on the global food market. And so what will happen then in the next year? Here we have to start talking about the future, not only about this few ships that will take Ukrainian grains that was harvested last year, actually, in Ukraine, that will take this harvest to the global market. But we have to think about the future. And now I don't hear anything about that.
Well, you reference a very important point that also, as you pointed out, many people are not talking about, which is that this deal, which is allowing this ship and the others who will go through it, is only for 120 days. That's 4 months. So that it will probably last until about the end of the year. So when you raise the point that what about next year and what about the year after that, very valid points. But I must then ask, at the level of Ukraine, inside of Ukraine, how difficult is it? Because you talk about the output having dropped by 50%, if what I heard you say is correct, or if I heard you correctly, by 50%. If that has happened, what are the factors? I mean, I know that there's war, and therefore so many people are in hiding and running, and, you know, internal migrants and so on. But is there a plan internally, perhaps, to leverage on this other plan to see if it is possible to expand some level of crop production, which President Zelensky did mention, because he said more than 500,000 Ukrainians are involved in agriculture?
Yeah, that's a problem. We actually had a full-scale war. And the problem is that this full-scale war is happening right at the most fruitful lands of Ukraine, right at the lands where we take the harvest, or we collect our harvest, and the lands which produce this grain for the world. So for Ukraine, I guess, well, I didn't see any estimations for the future year, because we still have some time. If we manage to free our lands at the south and at the east, then there will be no problem. We will feed the world. We will have the harvest next year. But if not, then we will just have the bread for ours, and that's it. That, yeah, there is. I guess there is some crisis plan of Ukrainian government, but we haven't heard about that yet, and we haven't seen any numbers and estimations. But definitely I can say that Ukrainians, those Ukrainians who still are in Ukraine, they will have food, but unfortunately we will not have much to sell abroad. That will be the problem. But we still, with the support of our allies, we still have hope, and we still have plans to kick Russians out of our territory and to have a good harvest next year.
I must ask you, though, because you've talked about it in both your answers to my questions, which is the quest for peace and the fact that, of course, if all of this doesn't end by the year's end, then there will be consequences that many are not talking about yet. Do you think this 120-day grain deal will, I mean, at the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul, you have Ukrainians, you have Russians, you have Turks, and you have United Nations officials there coordinating this. Do you think it could be an opening for more substantive peace talks during this 120 days, which could result in some kind of cessation of hostilities while negotiations take care of the rest?
Unfortunately, no, I'm not so optimistic. And I think that this grain deal will have quite higher chances to end unsuccessfully. Maybe Russia will just break it up as it did before, striking the Odessa port. But so it will not have any basis for peace agreement or peace deal further, because Russia is not the country which is listening to any reasonable arguments for negotiations. Russia is not looking for peace. Look what Russia is doing. It's like Russians' Hunger Games, Russia's Hunger Games. So Russia is blackmailing the world with a food crisis, and also Russia uses energy as a blackmailing tool. Russia is already blackmailing Europe with this energy policy, and Russia is doing its best to increase its energy influence in Africa. So Russia has already one tool of influence on African country, and it is grain, its product, its food. And the second tool it will have, if it will manage to build its atomic stations in some African countries, and also in Nigeria, there are plans on the table about it. So Russia will have this tool of influence. So why Moscow basically doesn't see any reason to give up, to step aside, to agree for any negotiations. And this morning there was very interesting post of Dmitry Medvedev, which was deleted quite soon, but it went viral immediately on the social media. And Dmitry Medvedev claimed that Kazakhstan is also not a sovereign state, and there will be only order when Russians will come to Kazakhstan and invade it. So we don't see any signs from Russia to start these peace talks. And here is the only way for us to fight till the end, to defeat Russia military. Then there will be possibility for peace talks.
Indeed, Dr. Olena Snigar at the Center for Global Studies Strategy in Kiev, Ukraine. Thank you for your time. I hope you're wrong. I hope that the Russians prove you wrong and they are able to sit down for peace talks so that all of this crisis will end and you can get on with your life. But thank you so much for joining us this morning. And just before we take a break, the United Nations is saying that key arrangements, including procedures for ships, still need to be worked out before empty vessels can come in and pick up cargoes from Ukraine using the new grains corridor, but a plan should be put together over the next few days. Shipping companies and the insurers that cover vessels need to be assured that the journey is secure with no threat of mines or attacks to both ships and their crews. These are typically known as standard operating procedures. The UN spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, says standard operating procedures will be finalized shortly and will then be made public.
In and out of Odessa port will be done. Those decisions will be taken by the port authorities of Odessa in terms of how much space they have on the berths. Obviously, there are a number of ships that have been in Odessa for quite some time. So, it would be fair to say that the port is congested. As soon as they give the clearance for more ships to come in, those ships will come in. But those will be commercial decisions and operational decisions taken by the Odessa port. The framework that we have will be there to facilitate that movement of ships both in and out with the inspection regime that we've talked about. What we've done is really created, through the MOU, created a climate where commercial operations can take place, right? Where commercial operations to export food, to export fertilizer from Russia can take place. We are not in the business of vetting contracts. We are not in the business of overseeing those commercial enterprises, right? It is the commercial market will function without the need of UN daily interference or operation. Yeah.
Meanwhile, London has eased some restrictions it imposed on Russia over the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, allowing companies to provide insurance and reinsurance to entities linked to Russia. The amendments to the General Trade License Russia sanctions vessels was announced by the UK Department for International Trade. The department explained in a brief statement that, quote, the general license has been revised to remove Regulation 28, that is financial services and funds related to restricted goods and restricted technology, from paragraph 1H. A similar move to ease anti-Russian sanctions was taken by the EU last month. On July the 21st, the EU Council had allowed transactions needed for Russian state-owned companies to sell oil to third parties. And after the break, firefighters battled blaze at medical center hit by Russian shelling. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Laddie Williams joins me at this point to unpack, as always, the business outcomes involving this crisis, directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
Hi, Laddie.
Morning.
Austria's gas dependence on Russia is down to below 50%. That's according to its government. So,
yeah,
is that moving in line with what the EU was proposing?
With that whole weaning off,
Yes.
at this point, we've seen, Europe talk about weaning off Russian gas and oil for a while now. And we're seeing, Austria actually making strides, when it comes to that. And what's helping them is actually storage. At this time, they're able to store about 50% of their gas needs, at this point. And what they actually need is about 78%. But they're able to, store about 50% at this point, which is about, in terawatts, that's about 50 terawatt hours, of gas. They're able to store that. And, that's also helping them, wean off at this point, not be heavily reliant on Russian gas. And at the end of the day, this has worked because they've been able to, because they started in March with about just 15 terawatts of gas, and now they've come all the way to 50, and they're hoping that by the heating season they're able to get about 80 terawatts of gas stored. So this will help them, in case the winter,
period,
in case Russia just wakes up and turns off, the taps. Austria will be able to, stand at this point. And at the end of the day, they're doing all they can, to store as much gas, as possible, so that at the end of the day, they won't be caught unawares. Their manufacturing can still go on. They can still produce. They can still heat their homes, when the winter comes. So it's quite laudable. It's a good one. Seen by Russia, and I'm sure others will want to, follow, emulate them with their storage at this time.
There's lesson in there for us too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, Bank of Russia is expanding its restrictions for hard currency withdrawals until March next year.
Yeah.
Is this a sign of success?
Well, at the end of the day, we've seen Russia use different kinds of capital control methods, to keep the ruble, strong. And we've seen that actually work. We've seen the ruble actually the best performing currency, even though we saw, the US dollar go on that incredible run.
Indeed.
And most currencies, suffered. But we saw, the ruble actually strengthened. Is because of these capital controls, they put in place, by not allowing withdrawals of hard currency, and also making sure that exporters, converted all their proceeds to
Rubles, right.
So that increased, demand for ruble and, was able to keep the ruble, strong, even with all the sanctions, we saw from the U.S. And its allies. So now they're, going a step further. They've put a limit now for what you can withdraw, as a citizen there in Russia. You can only withdraw about $10,000 of, hard currency and the equivalent to in euros. But if you're a non-national, you cannot withdraw, at all. And all of this is to keep the ruble, strong at this time. And, at the end of the day, we know they make sure they keep the ruble strong to make it look good, to make the economy, the Russian economy look good at this point. And, we've seen other currencies suffer. We've seen other countries struggle, even with emerging economies here. We're seeing what's happening, here with our Naira. And obviously it'd be nice to see more demand, for the Naira at this point. But we have a lot of catching up to do to get to that.
There are lessons in that for us.
So many lessons, from Russia at this point.
But then a study from Yale says that sanctions are, in fact, negatively affecting the Russian economy.
Yes.
But then, I mean, there will be those who will immediately argue that Yale is in the United States, so
yeah, biased.
Are you supposed to completely trust this?
Exactly. Well, there's a couple of business experts and economists, from Yale. They've been watching the Russian economy, and they say even though we see the ruble, the best performing currency, we've seen the Russian economy still stand at this point, but they're saying if you look closer, you will see the cracks. They're talking about how Russian output is suffering at this point because they're not able to get a lot of imports in, important tech imports that they need for production, and that's also stalling their production at this point. We've seen especially their automobile sector. That one has, almost come to a standstill at this point. They used to produce about 100,000 cars, per month, but that has dropped to about 27,000. So they're looking at all of this data, some of these data that don't come out, and they're saying, you know what, the Russian economy is actually, suffering. They're saying that even mechanics cannot get the parts, that they need
to even fix, vehicles.
Existing vehicles. And about 5 million jobs, have been lost because of the exodus of, most of those foreign companies. We're not seeing a foreign investment, like before because of, these sanctions. And to them, they're saying that in the years to come, we will see how much, these sanctions have actually, wrecked the Russian economy. So it kind of makes sense, when you look at it, look at some of that data, that's not coming out to the open, and you can see that there are cracks under there talking about the Russian economy.
Well, the one that affects us here, oil prices.
Oh, yes, oil prices.
Somebody had said that this was going to happen at some point.
Yeah.
That they've dipped below $100.
Yeah, below 100, again.
And as a result, global equities
immediately
reacted and headed in,
Exactly, because talking about global equities now, we saw that, July performance, everyone was excited thinking, maybe it's a turning point, for the market. Maybe it's time for the bulls to actually return, and see new highs, with these markets, talking about the global equities market and the crypto space. But at the end of the day, we're seeing August not start off, on the right foot. We're seeing sell-offs. We're seeing, the markets actually starting, the month of August in the red. And we also saw those disappointing manufacturing figures from Asia, the US, and all of that, showing that the markets are in for a run this August, but we don't know what direction. Could be down, but some still expect some upward. Yeah.
All right then, Laddie, thank you for that.
Thank you.
There'll be more updates on that and more stories on Business Morning right after this show and later on in the day on Business Incorporated, so do watch out for that. A fire blazed at a medical dispensary in the southern Ukrainian port city of Mykolaiv after Russian shelling and missile strikes in the region. The Mykolaiv State Emergency Service said they extinguished a fire of 150 square meters in a dispensary in Zaporizhzhia district close to the city center. Footage released by the Mykolaiv State Emergency Service shows firefighters battling flames in the building with multiple vehicles at the scene. The video also shows a large crater in the ground. A demining unit was called to the shelling site, according to local authorities. The strikes resulted in further fires in a gymnasium, office buildings, as well as a number of utility buildings and a private residential building, according to the authorities. Mykolaiv is a strategically important city that borders the mostly Russian-occupied Kherson region. And Premier League Chief Executive Richard Masters says it would be, quote, difficult to claim Roman Abramovich's era at Chelsea was good for the brand of England's top division. Following Abramovich's arrival as Chelsea owner in 2003, the London club enjoyed unprecedented success, but after Russia invaded Ukraine in February, he was sanctioned by the UK government due to his connections to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Although Masters declined to say Abramovich would fail the owners and directors test had it been in place 19 years ago, he believes only Chelsea fans would suggest that his era was good for the league. He also thinks that the owners test will probably be strengthened going forward. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akperi. There's an update in the world today at 5 o'clock, so do watch out for that. For now, good morning.